Hey guys, tonight we're not just dipping our toes into history, we're diving headfirst into the very birthplace of Western political thought. You probably think of ancient Greece, particularly Athens, as the shining beacon of democracy, the place where ideas of freedom and self-governance first blossomed. You imagine lofty debates, wise philosophers, and citizens actively shaping their own destiny. And while those elements were certainly present, tonight, we're going to peel back the layers of idealized legend and uncover why you'd awful hate ancient Greek democracy. Boring history for sleep. You're about to discover that being a citizen in ancient Athens was a relentless, exhausting, and often terrifying commitment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're out there somewhere in the quiet hum of your own corner of the world, let us know where you're listening from. Perhaps you're nestled in a cozy apartment in New York City, or maybe drifting off in a peaceful cottage in rural England. Wherever you are, just relax. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in the Nix, a small hill in Athens, looking out at a vast assembly of men. This is the Ecclesia, the assembly of the citizens, the beating heart of Athenian democracy. You are one of them. For Athens, democracy was a direct participatory affair, not a representative one like most modern democracies. This means that if you were a male citizen, and we'll get to the horrifying exclusions later, don't you worry, you were expected, indeed, practically required, to show up and participate in person. Welcome to voting was a full-time job. You face endless, mandatory attendance and brutal debates. Imagine your schedule. The assembly met regularly, often 40 times a year, sometimes more, with each session lasting from dawn until dusk. That's a lot of meetings. And these weren't polite coffee gatherings. They were raucous, passionate, and often brutal debates. You'd listen to orators, some brilliant, some utterly incompetent, shout their arguments, trying to sway the thousands of citizens present. You're expected to not only listen but also to speak, to propose laws, to debate foreign policy, to decide on matters of war and peace, and to vote with your own hand, in person. Consider the sheer time commitment. If you were a farmer, a craftsman, or a merchant, every day spent at the assembly was a day not spent earning a living. You couldn't just cast your vote and leave. You had to stay for the entire session. Imagine trying to explain to your family why you missed a day's wages. Again, because the city needed your input on whether to declare war on Sparta. And if you didn't show up, oh, there were penalties. Citizens who tried to shirk their civic duties might be marked with red paint by public slaves and face fines, or even lose certain rights. A little-known detail is that Athenian citizens were sometimes paid a small sum to miss those for attending the assembly and serving on juries, ostensibly to allow poorer citizens to participate. But it was rarely enough to compensate for a full day's lost wages for many. So it's not like you were getting paid handsomely to sit there. The debates themselves could be grueling. You're not dealing with polite parliamentary procedure. Orators would shout, heckle, and often resort to personal insults and emotional manipulation. You'd have to sit through hours of fiery speeches, trying to discern the truth amidst the rhetoric, trying to make decisions that could literally send your sons to war or bankrupt your city. Imagine the mental fatigue, the endless listening, the constant pressure to make critical decisions without the benefit of expert analysis or long-term foresight. It's a bit like being forced to attend every single city council meeting, every single school board meeting, and every single federal budget debate all rolled into one, and you can't leave until it's all decided. And the voting. No secret ballots here for many critical decisions. You would vote by a show of hands, or by dropping pebbles into urns. This meant that your vote was often public, visible to your neighbors, your rivals, and the powerful figures who might be watching. Imagine the pressure to vote with the crowd, or the fear of standing alone if you held an unpopular opinion. This lack of anonymity could lead to intimidation and a subtle form of coercion, making true independent thought a risky endeavor. Historians still debate the true level of individual freedom in voting within the Athenian assembly, acknowledging both the ideal of direct participation and the practical pressures of public voting. Some scholars argue that while formal coercion was rare, social pressures were immense. Beyond the assembly, you were also expected to serve on juries. Athenian juries were enormous, sometimes numbering 501, 1001, or even 2001 citizens. Imagine sitting for days, sometimes weeks, listening to complex legal arguments, then having to make a life or death decision for a fellow citizen. You're not a trained lawyer or judge. You're just an ordinary citizen, and the fate of others rests in your hands. This civic duty was frequent and unavoidable. So, as you drift further into sleep, let the exhausting reality of ancient Greek democracy settle over you. It wasn't just a right. It was a relentless, demanding obligation that consumed your time, tested your endurance, and forced you into constant public participation. You feel the phantom ache of hours spent debating, the pressure of a public vote, and the profound burden of constant civic responsibility. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That for all its ideals, democracy could be such an exhausting full-time job. You're still there, lingering in that slightly exhausted echo of Athens' demanding civic duties, perhaps feeling a phantom ache from a long, grueling assembly debate. We've explored how voting was a full-time job. Now, let's delve into an even more unsettling aspect of this perfect democracy, one that could turn the very cornerstone of freedom into a terrifying instrument of injustice, the tyranny of the majority. You suffer under the whims of popular, often irrational, votes. Imagine yourself as a citizen in ancient Athens, proud of your right to participate directly in every major decision. You believe in the power of the people. But the Athenian assembly, composed of thousands of ordinary men, was incredibly susceptible to sudden shifts in mood, emotional appeals, and the sway of charismatic or manipulative orators. There were no constitutional checks and balances as you know them, no Supreme Court to strike down an unjust law, no Bill of Rights to protect minority opinions. What the majority decided, however impulsively or unjustly, became law. Consider a dramatic example, the Mytilenean debate during the Peloponnesian War. The city of Mytilene rebelled against Athens, and after a difficult siege, surrendered. The initial decision by the Athenian assembly, swayed by the fiery orator Cleon, was to execute all the male citizens of Mytilene and enslave their women and children. Imagine being in that assembly, swept up in the anger and desire for revenge, voting for such a horrifying decree. You might think, justice. But then, the cold light of day dawns. The very next day, a different assembly was convened, haunted by second thoughts. Imagine the agonizing debate. Diodotus, a more moderate voice, argued that such brutality was not only unjust, but strategically unwise. The arguments were fierce, the emotions high, and in the end, by a single narrow vote, the Athenians reversed their decision. The ship carrying the order for mass execution had already departed, and another had to be dispatched immediately, rowing furiously to intercept the first before the horrifying deed was done. It arrived just in time. You breathe a sigh of relief, but also feel a chilling dread. Your city, your democracy, had come within a hair's breadth of committing an unspeakable atrocity, swayed by a momentary surge of collective rage. This isn't just theory, it's a terrifying historical fact. Historians still debate the precise motivations and extent of mob rule in Athenian democracy, with some scholars arguing that such extreme impulses were rare, while others point to instances like the Mytilenean debate and the trial of the Arginusei generals as evidence of democracy's inherent vulnerability to irrationality. This vulnerability to the tyranny of the majority meant that your rights were not inherent or inalienable. They were granted by the will of the assembly, and could be revoked by the assembly. If you held an unpopular opinion, if you belonged to a minority faction, or if you simply fell out of favor, you could find yourself targeted. There was no robust legal framework to protect you from the whims of thousands of ordinary men. Imagine trying to argue against a popular war, or advocate for a policy that went against the prevailing sentiment. Your voice could be drowned out, your arguments ignored, and your very safety put at risk if the majority turned against you. A humorous, if dark, anecdote from this era involves a man named Epictetus, who, during a vote, miscounted the hands and mistakenly announced a different result, almost causing a different outcome. It highlights the often chaotic and unscientific nature of counting votes in such a massive, direct democracy. Imagine a vote on your own life or fortune being decided by a simple miscount of raised hands. The emotional swings of the assembly could be dizzying. One day, they might laud a general as a hero. The next, if a campaign went poorly, they might condemn him to death. The trial of the generals after the Battle of Arginusae, 406 BCE, is another chilling example. Despite a naval victory, the generals failed to rescue survivors from wrecked ships due to a storm. The assembly, distraught by the loss of life, voted to try them all as a group, violating Athenian legal custom. Socrates himself, serving on the jury, bravely refused to participate in the illegal vote, but the majority prevailed, and 6 generals were executed. You watch this terrifying display, realizing that popular anger could override even established law and reason, leading to the unjust condemnation of men who had just fought for your city. This constant threat of popular anger, of being swept away by the emotional tide of the assembly, created a deeply unsettling environment. You couldn't rely on consistent legal principles or a stable political climate. Your fortune, your reputation, your very life could be decided by the passions of thousands of your fellow citizens. Swayed by rhetoric and fleeting emotions, it's a terrifying form of freedom. Isn't it one where your liberty is always contingent on the collective mood? So, as you drift further into sleep, let the chilling reality of the tyranny of the majority in ancient Greek democracy settle over you. For all its ideals, it was a system vulnerable to the whims of popular anger, impulsive decisions, and a terrifying lack of safeguards for minority rights. You feel the ghostly chill of votes cast in fury, the fragility of justice in the face of a swaying crowd, and the profound discomfort of a freedom that could, at any moment, turn against you. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the very power of the people could also be its most horrifying flaw? You're still there, lingering in that slightly unsettling echo of Athenian majoritarian whims, perhaps feeling a phantom shiver from the thought of a vote gone wrong. We've explored the demanding nature of direct democracy and the potential for the tyranny of the majority. Now, let's peel back an even more fundamental and horrifying layer of ancient Greek society: no rights for others. You realize you're excluded, with no voice or protection. Imagine yourself in ancient Athens, a city celebrated as the birthplace of democracy. You might be filled with pride at the ideals of self-governance, of citizens participating directly in their own laws. But then, you look around, and a chilling reality sets in: this democracy isn't for everyone. In fact, it's for a shockingly small, privileged minority. If you weren't born into that select group, your life in this beacon of freedom was one of exclusion, powerlessness, and vulnerability. First, let's talk about women. If you were a woman in ancient Athens, regardless of your social standing, you had no political rights whatsoever. You could not vote, hold office, or even participate in the assembly. Your life was largely confined to the domestic sphere, managing the household, raising children, and rarely appearing in public without a male escort. Imagine being intelligent, articulate, capable of profound thought, yet utterly silenced in the public discourse of your own city. Your ideas, your opinions, your very voice, simply did not matter in the political arena. You were, effectively, a perpetual minor, legally under the control of your father, then your husband, then your sons. This fundamental exclusion, silencing half the free population, is a horrifying irony in a society that championed the people. J. Historians still debate the true social and economic power of Athenian women despite their lack of political rights, acknowledging that while legally restricted, some wealthy women might have exerted influence indirectly through their male relatives, but their direct civic exclusion was absolute. Then there are the medics metoikoi. Imagine yourself as a successful merchant, an artisan, or a skilled worker who has chosen to live and work in Athens. You might have resided there for decades, built a thriving business, paid your taxes, and even contributed significantly to the city's economy and culture. But you were not born in Athens, or your parents weren't. Therefore, you are a medic, a resident alien. You have no political rights. You cannot own land or property without a special dispensation. You are always under the legal guardianship of an Athenian citizen. You pay special taxes that citizens do not. And if you failed to pay that tax, you could be sold into slavery. Imagine living your entire life contributing to a society, loving its culture, yet forever being an outsider, a second-class resident with no voice, always under threat of legal or financial retribution. A little-known detail is that medics often formed the backbone of Athens' skilled labor force and its commercial enterprises, contributing immensely to its prosperity, yet were systematically denied civic participation. And then, most horrifyingly, there are the slaves. We've briefly touched on the misery of slavery in other contexts, but in ancient Athens, this institution was fundamental to their democracy. The leisure time that allowed male citizens to participate in politics, to debate in the agora, to train as hoplites, that leisure was largely bought by the forced labor of slaves. Imagine being one of the estimated 80,000 to 100,000 slaves in Attica, vastly outnumbering the approximately 30,000 to 40,000 male citizens. You have no rights, no property, no legal standing. Your body and your labor are owned by another. You can be bought, sold, beaten, or even killed by your master with relative impunity. You are the invisible foundation upon which this free society rests. Your suffering enabling the very democracy that denies your humanity. Historians still debate the ethics of Athenian democracy resting on widespread chattel slavery, with some acknowledging it as a product of its time while others condemn it as a fundamental contradiction to their ideals of liberty. So, when Athenians spoke of the people, or citizens, they were referring to a very specific, narrow group freeborn adult males. If you fell outside this highly exclusive club, if you were a woman, a medic, or a slave, then the celebrated Athenian democracy offered you no voice, no power, and often, no protection. You were simply a resource, a background character in the grand play of Athenian politics. You realize that this democracy was built upon layers of profound exclusion, a terrifying hypocrisy at its very core. The freedom enjoyed by some was directly predicated on the utter lack of freedom for countless others. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the very system hailed as the pinnacle of ancient liberty was, for the vast majority of its inhabitants, nothing but a system of rigid, horrifying disenfranchisement. You feel the ghostly weight of those silenced voices, the crushing burden of a freedom denied. You're still there, lingering in that slightly unsettling echo of ancient Athenian exclusion, perhaps feeling a phantom weight from the silence of those denied a voice. We've explored the demanding nature of their direct democracy, the potential for tyranny of the majority, and the horrifying reality of who was truly excluded from civic life. Now, let's delve into one of the most chilling and unique features of Athenian democracy. A terrifying democratic weapon designed to remove powerful individuals who threaten the city ostracism's sudden chill. You face exile, cast out by a single, terrifying vote. Imagine yourself as a prominent citizen of Athens. You might be a successful politician, a celebrated general, or a wealthy aristocrat. You've participated actively in the assembly, perhaps even swayed public opinion on countless occasions. You are at the height of your influence, your name known and respected throughout the polis. Then, one day, the assembly decides that a vote of ostracism will be held. A chill runs down your spine. For this unique democratic process holds the power to utterly shatter your life. Not for a crime, but simply for being too powerful, too popular, or too much of a perceived threat to the city's democratic stability. Ostracism was a truly peculiar and terrifying democratic institution. Once a year, the Athenian assembly would vote on whether to hold an ostracism. If they decided to proceed, then, on a designated day, citizens would gather in the agora and write the name of the man they wished to see exiled on a shard of pottery, called an ostrakon. Imagine thousands of citizens, each scratching a name onto a piece of ceramic. If a minimum of 6,000 votes were cast against a single individual, that person was ostracized, exiled from Athens for 10 years. Not for treason, not for corruption, not for a specific crime, but simply because the majority of citizens felt he was becoming too influential, too dangerous, or just too annoying. You could be ostracized simply for having too many friends, or too much charisma. It's like being canceled, but with forced exile for a decade. Consider the terrifying implications. You, the ostracized, lose your citizenship rights for 10 years. Though your property remains intact, you are forced to leave your home, your family, your friends, and your entire life behind. Imagine being uprooted from everything you know, cast out into the wider Greek world, perhaps without a clear plan or support network, for an entire decade. Your political career is over, your social standing annihilated, and your very identity as an Athenian stripped away. This isn't just a political defeat, it's a profound personal devastation, a form of civic death imposed by the very people you once served. A little-known detail is that an ostracized individual could often return after 10 years, and sometimes even regain influence. But the immediate impact of the exile was nonetheless severe. The process itself was fraught with potential for abuse and political maneuvering. You might see rival politicians or factions actively campaigning against an opponent, urging citizens to write his name on their ostraka. It became a tool for settling political scores, for eliminating rivals, or for neutralizing anyone who posed a challenge to the status quo. Imagine the whisper campaigns, the public denunciations, the subtle pressures exerted to ensure a rival's name appeared on enough shards. Historians still debate the true effectiveness and fairness of ostracism as a democratic tool. Some argue it was a vital safety valve to prevent tyranny and maintain democratic equilibrium, while others contend it was frequently used for petty political vendettas, often removing competent leaders for capricious reasons. One infamous case is that of Themistocles, a brilliant Athenian general who was instrumental in the Greek victory over Persia at the Battle of Salamis. Despite his immense contributions to Athens' survival and glory, he was ostracized in the 470s BCE, likely due to suspicions of his ambition and perhaps his arrogance. Imagine being ostracized after saving your city from existential threat. It's a chilling reminder that in Athenian democracy, no one, not even a hero, was safe from the sudden chill of popular disapproval. The ostraka themselves are a fascinating and terrifying artifact of this system. Thousands of these pottery shards, inscribed with names, have been found by archaeologists, bearing witness to the raw power of Athenian public opinion. You might see a shard with your own name, written by a fellow citizen, sealing your fate. It's a very tangible, very personal manifestation of democratic power. So, as you drift further into sleep, let the chilling thought of ostracism's sudden chill in ancient Greek democracy settle over you. It was a unique, terrifying power wielded by the citizens themselves, capable of exiling even their most prominent figures not for crime, but for perceived threat. You feel the ghostly weight of the ostrakon in your hand, the terrifying knowledge that a single vote could shatter a life. and the profound discomfort of a freedom that allowed for such a brutal democratic banishment. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the price of direct democracy could be such a horrifying personal exile? You're still there, lingering in that slightly unsettling echo of ostracism's sudden chill, perhaps feeling a phantom shiver from the thought of being cast out? We've explored the demanding nature of direct democracy, the potential for tyranny of the majority, the horrifying reality of exclusion, and the brutal weapon of exile. Now, let's consider a terrifying aspect of Athenian governance that would make you desperately crave professionalism: amateur hour leadership. You're led by random citizens, not trained professionals. Imagine yourself as an ordinary Athenian citizen, sitting in the assembly, preparing to make monumental decisions for your city-state. You've just debated whether to declare war on Sparta, or how to manage the city's vast treasury. But here's the terrifying twist: many of the key positions in Athenian government, including vital military and administrative roles, were not filled by experienced, lifelong professionals, but by ordinary citizens chosen largely by lot, or sometimes by direct election for limited terms. You are, quite literally, being led by amateurs. Think about it. The Athenians, in their profound dedication to democratic principles, believed that every citizen was capable of serving the state, and that drawing lots, a process called kleroterion, prevented corruption and the rise of powerful individuals. This meant that the archons, chief magistrates, many members of the Bull Council, and even some military commanders could be chosen by random chance. Imagine waking up one morning to find out that your neighbor, the shoemaker, has just been selected by lot to oversee the city's grain supply for a year, or that the potter down the street is now in charge of the city's naval dockyards. You might chuckle at the thought, but the reality is chilling. The fate of your city rested on the shoulders of individuals with no formal training, no specific qualifications beyond being a citizen and being chosen by chance. This reliance on amateur leadership had horrifying consequences, especially in areas requiring specialized knowledge or long-term strategic thinking. Military command is a prime example. While some generals strategoi were elected and could serve multiple terms, allowing for some continuity, many other military positions, and certainly the broader governance, relied on randomly selected citizens. Imagine a critical military campaign against a seasoned enemy. You, as a hoplite, might be led into battle by a general who is a brilliant orator in the assembly, but utterly incompetent on the battlefield. His strategic decisions could lead to devastating losses, all because he lacked the necessary military expertise. A little-known detail is that while the strategoi were elected, even they faced strict accountability and could be impeached or even executed for perceived failures, as we saw with the Arginusei generals. This added another layer of pressure and risk to their amateur leadership. Then there's the bureaucracy. In a modern state, you rely on a vast apparatus of trained civil servants who understand complex laws, financial systems, and logistics. In ancient Athens, many administrative tasks were handled by annually appointed citizens, often chosen by lot. Imagine your city's finances being managed by a rotating cast of ordinary citizens, each trying to learn the ropes for a single year before being replaced by someone else equally inexperienced. This amateur hour approach could lead to massive inefficiencies, corruption despite the intent to prevent it, and a profound lack of institutional memory. You might find permits delayed, public projects mismanaged, or tax collection utterly chaotic, all because the people in charge simply didn't know what they were doing. Historians still debate whether the reliance on amateur leadership was a fatal flaw of Athenian democracy or a testament to the versatility of its citizens. Some argue it fostered civic engagement and prevented despotism, while others contend it led to significant incompetence and instability, especially in times of crisis. Consider the implications for foreign policy. Major decisions about alliances, treaties, and declarations of war were made by the entire assembly, often swayed by passionate speeches rather than cold, calculated analysis. and the execution of those policies often left to randomly chosen officials. Imagine your city sending an envoy to a foreign power, led by someone who has never traveled beyond Attica, or negotiating a complex treaty with someone whose only qualification is good luck in a lottery. This amateur diplomacy could lead to misinterpretations, broken agreements, and ultimately, disastrous wars. It's a bit like letting your entire neighborhood vote on and then implement the plans for a new nuclear power plant. The Athenian system, for all its revolutionary ideals, put immense faith in the average citizen's ability to govern complex affairs. While admirable in theory, in practice, it meant that critical functions of the state were often handled by individuals who were learning on the job, with potentially catastrophic consequences. You live in a state where leadership is a constant experiment, where expertise is often secondary to civic participation. It's a terrifying thought your very survival depends on the collective, often untrained, wisdom of your fellow citizens. So, as you drift further into sleep, let the unsettling reality of amateur hour leadership in ancient Greek democracy settle over you. The city, for all its brilliance, constantly gambled its future on the untrained hands of its ordinary citizens. You feel the ghostly shiver of mismanaged projects, the quiet anxiety of uncertain policies, and the profound discomfort of knowing that your fate rests in the hands of good intentions rather than seasoned expertise. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the price of ultimate civic participation could be such a horrifying lack of professional guidance? You're still there, lingering in that slightly unsettling echo of Athenian amateur hour leadership, perhaps feeling a phantom cringe from a poorly run public office. We've explored the demanding nature of direct democracy, the potential for tyranny of the majority, the horrifying reality of exclusion, the brutal weapon of ostracism, and the risks of unqualified governance. Now, let's delve into another terrifying aspect of Athenian civic life, one that could turn your daily interactions into a relentless, exhausting, and often financially ruinous ordeal: constant, petty lawsuits. You drown in endless, vindictive legal battles. Imagine yourself as an ordinary Athenian citizen. You're proud of your right to participate in the legal system, to bring a complaint against someone who has wronged you, or to defend yourself against accusations. You might envision a noble system of justice, a place where wrongs are righted. But the reality of Athenian law was often a chaotic, deeply personal, and highly litigious nightmare. Your city was, in many ways, obsessed with lawsuits, and you were almost guaranteed to be involved in one, either as plaintiff, defendant, or juror, at some point in your life. First, consider the sheer volume of lawsuits. The Athenian legal system was incredibly busy, handling thousands of cases annually. There was no professional police force as you know it, and no public prosecutor. Instead, it was largely up to individual citizens to bring charges against others, even for crimes against the state. This system, known as private prosecution, meant that anyone could sue anyone else for almost anything, turning everyday disputes into legal battles. Imagine your neighbor's dog barking too loudly, or a slight against your family's honor. These could all become grounds for a lawsuit. You live in a society where almost every interaction carries the risk of ending up in court. A little-known detail is that wealthy Athenians sometimes hired sycophanti sycophants, professional informers and litigators, who would bring frivolous or blackmail lawsuits for profit, further fueling the litigious atmosphere. The process itself was grueling and stressful. You, as a litigant, had to present your own case. There were no professional lawyers to argue for you, though you could hire speechwriters to compose your arguments. Imagine standing before a massive jury of hundreds or thousands of your fellow citizens, trying to present a coherent, persuasive case, cross-examine witnesses, and defend your reputation. You'd have to master the art of rhetoric, of emotional appeal, and of personal attack. The stakes were incredibly high, not just fines, but loss of property, loss of reputation, or even exile or death. You feel the immense pressure. the constant anxiety of having your entire life scrutinized and judged by a huge, unpredictable body of your peers. The trials were often less about objective truth and more about persuasion, public opinion, and personal attacks. Orators would frequently resort to ad hominem arguments, bringing up a defendant's character flaws, past misdeeds, or even personal habits. Rather than focusing solely on the facts of the case, imagine being on trial for a perceived wrong. And suddenly, your entire life history, your family's reputation, and your personal quirks are being dissected and ridiculed in front of thousands. It's a terrifying form of public shaming, where your personal privacy is completely annihilated. Historians still debate the true fairness and objectivity of Athenian jury trials, with some scholars arguing that the large jury size made them less susceptible to bribery but more prone to emotional manipulation, while others highlight the lack of formal rules of evidence as a significant flaw. The time commitment for these lawsuits was immense. If you were a litigant, you would spend weeks, months, or even years preparing your case, gathering evidence, and appearing in court. And if you were a juror, remember that full-time job of civic duty. You would spend countless days listening to these prolonged, often tedious, and frequently vindictive legal battles. This constant engagement with the legal system drained time and resources from productive activities, contributing to overall societal inefficiency. You might complain about having to serve on yet another jury, listening to yet another petty squabble, but it was your civic duty, and the vindictiveness could be brutal. If you brought a lawsuit and failed to win a certain percentage of the votes, typically 1/5, you could be fined. This was a deterrent against entirely frivolous lawsuits, but it also meant that bringing a legitimate case carried a significant financial risk. Conversely, a successful lawsuit could ruin your opponent, leading to their financial collapse, loss of reputation, or even exile. The legal system was often used as a tool for personal revenge, political maneuvering, or financial gain, rather than purely for justice. It's a bit like living in a society where everyone constantly carries a metaphorical lawsuit in their back pocket, ready to pull it out at the slightest offense. So, as you drift further into sleep, let the overwhelming, frustrating reality of constant, petty lawsuits in ancient Greek democracy settle over you. Your life was a constant dance around potential legal pitfalls, where every interaction could become a courtroom drama. You feel the ghostly stress of preparing your own defense, the humiliation of public scrutiny, and the profound discomfort of a society where legal battles were a pervasive, often vindictive, part of everyday existence. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the very system meant to resolve disputes could become such a horrifying source of endless conflict. You're still there, lingering in that slightly exasperated echo of ancient Athenian lawsuits, perhaps feeling a phantom eye roll from yet another petty dispute. We've explored the demanding civic duties, the tyranny of the majority, the horrifying exclusions, the chilling power of ostracism, the risks of amateur leadership, and the pervasive nature of legal battles. Now, let's shift our focus to a realm where democratic decisions had truly life-and-death consequences, often leading to prolonged misery, war's democratic price. You're forced to fight endless, often disastrous, conflicts. Imagine yourself as an Athenian male citizen, proud of your right to vote on matters of war and peace. You stand in the assembly, listening to fiery orators like Pericles or Cleon, passionately arguing for military campaigns against rivals like Sparta or the Persian Empire. You raise your hand, casting your vote for war, believing you are exercising your sacred democratic right to defend your city and its interests. But what you are also doing, unknowingly, is committing yourself and your family to a relentless, often disastrous cycle of conflict, where the price of democratic decision-making was paid in blood and treasure. Ancient Greek warfare, particularly the Peloponnesian War, 431–404 BCE, was not a distant professional affair. It was a direct, personal burden on every citizen. If the assembly voted for war, you, as a hoplite citizen soldier, were expected to serve. You would leave your farm, your workshop, your family, and march off to battle. These weren't just short skirmishes. They were often prolonged campaigns, sieges, and naval expeditions that could last for months or even years. Imagine the economic strain on your household, losing your labor for extended periods, and the constant fear for your life. A little-known detail is that Athenians often used the jury pay misthos to fund military service or simply survive while away, blurring the lines between civic duty and military necessity. The horrifying aspect of democratic war-making was its susceptibility to popular impulses and short-sightedness. Remember the tyranny of the majority. This applied directly to military decisions. The assembly could vote for ambitious, ill-conceived campaigns, swayed by charismatic rhetoric, popular anger, or the promise of easy gains, even against the advice of experienced generals. You might witness a vote for a massive expedition, like the disastrous Sicilian expedition 415-413 BCE against Syracuse during the Peloponnesian War. Despite warnings from seasoned strategists, the assembly, swayed by the ambitious Alcibiades, voted for an overwhelming force. Imagine the horror of that expedition. You are part of a vast fleet of ships and an immense army, sailing thousands of miles from home. The campaign drags on, plagued by disease, poor leadership, and unexpected resistance. You watch your comrades die from sickness, or fall in futile assaults. Supplies run low, reinforcements are slow to arrive, and morale plummets. In the end, the entire expedition is annihilated, thousands of Athenians killed or captured, the navy utterly destroyed. This wasn't a defeat, it was a catastrophe of epic proportions, directly caused by a democratic decision that was based more on hubris and ambition than sound strategic planning. You, if you survived, would carry the indelible scars of this collective, democratically sanctioned folly. Historians still debate whether the Sicilian expedition was a strategic inevitability, given Athens's imperial ambitions, or a catastrophic miscalculation born of democratic overconfidence. However, its role in weakening Athens and contributing to its eventual defeat in the Peloponnesian War is undeniable. The cost of constant warfare bled the Athenian treasury dry. You, as a citizen, would face ever-increasing taxes and forced contributions to fund the war effort. Your wealth, your property, your very survival was constantly at risk from the financial demands of endless conflict. Temples were stripped of their treasures. Rich citizens were compelled to fund warships, and ordinary citizens faced crippling levies. Imagine working hard to build your wealth, only to see it siphoned away to fund a distant losing war, all decided by your own vote. Beyond the financial and human cost, there was the psychological toll. You lived in a state of almost perpetual conflict for decades. The fear of invasion, the loss of loved ones, the constant anxiety of a message from the battlefield, these were ever-present realities. Your freedom in Athens came with the terrifying burden of constantly voting on and fighting in wars that often brought little but misery and loss. It's a bit like being trapped in a never-ending war council where every decision you make could lead to your personal ruin. So, as you drift further into sleep, let the chilling reality of war's democratic price in ancient Greece settle over you. Your participation in the glorious democratic process meant an inescapable entanglement in brutal, often disastrous conflicts. You feel the ghostly burden of a voting pebble in your hand, the distant rumble of a battle you voted for, and the profound discomfort of a freedom that directly committed you to endless, horrifying bloodshed. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the price of ultimate self-governance could be such a brutal, relentless cycle of war. You're still there, lingering in that slightly unsettling echo of war's democratic price, perhaps feeling a phantom ache from a long-lost battle you personally voted for. We've explored the demanding civic duties, the tyranny of the majority, the horrifying exclusions, the chilling power of ostracism, the risks of amateur leadership, the pervasive nature of legal battles, and the relentless cycle of conflict. Now, let's delve into the very foundation of their societal order, one that, for all its revolutionary ideals, was undergirded by truly agonizing and disproportionate punishments. The draconian legal code. You face laws with agonizing, disproportionate punishments. Imagine yourself as an ordinary citizen of ancient Athens, proud of your city's reputation for law and order. You might envision justice being dispensed fairly, perhaps with the wisdom of Solon's reforms. But before Solon, and even subtly influencing the spirit of Athenian law afterward, existed the chilling legacy of Draco's Code. This wasn't just harsh, it was horrifyingly severe, making almost every offense, no matter how minor, punishable by death. Dating back to the late 7th century BCE, the draconian laws were notorious for their extreme severity. The most famous aspect, which you would hear whispered with a shiver, was that almost every crime, whether petty theft or murder, carried the death penalty. Imagine living in a society where stealing a cabbage from a neighbor's garden could, theoretically, lead to your execution. You might chuckle at the absurdity, but the underlying terror is palpable. This isn't just about deterrence, it's about absolute, unyielding retribution. You feel a constant anxiety, knowing that a single misstep, a moment of desperation, could literally cost you your life. Historians still debate the precise practical application and enforcement of Draco's famously harsh laws in everyday life, with some scholars suggesting they were perhaps more symbolic and designed to establish a new, unchallengeable legal precedent rather than being applied universally to every minor offense. However, their reputation for extreme severity persisted for centuries. Consider the disproportionate nature of the punishments. If you, a common citizen, borrowed a small sum and couldn't repay it, you could be sold into slavery. Remember that crushing toll of slavery? This meant that even minor financial misfortunes could lead to a horrifying loss of freedom, a literal death of your civic life, and the brutalization of your existence. This isn't just a fine, it's a life sentence of servitude for a simple debt. A little-known detail is that while Solon's reforms later abolished debt slavery, the memory and the underlying philosophy of severe punishment remained part of the Athenian legal consciousness for centuries. Even if death or slavery wasn't the direct consequence, other punishments could be agonizingly cruel. Public shaming and physical mutilation were not uncommon. Imagine being branded, or having a limb amputated for repeated theft. You would bear the mark of your crime for the rest of your life, an inescapable symbol of your transgression. This wasn't about rehabilitation. It was about public deterrence and permanent stigmatization. You would witness these punishments, their brutality seared into your memory, serving as a constant warning. The legal process itself, while involving juries, could still be a terrifying ordeal, especially when coupled with draconian principles. You would represent yourself, without modern legal aid, facing an accusation that could lead to your death. The arguments might be swayed by rhetoric, emotion, or social standing, rather than clear evidence. The stakes were always incredibly high, forcing you into a terrifying performance where your very survival depended on your ability to persuade thousands of fellow citizens. You feel the profound pressure, the constant anxiety of a system that demanded perfection and offered little mercy. Moreover, the draconian spirit contributed to a culture of vindictiveness. If you were wronged, the law offered brutal recourse. This could lead to cycles of retaliation and extreme punishments, rather than reconciliation or nuanced justice. The legal system, while providing a framework for resolving disputes, also encouraged a harsh, unforgiving approach to human error and crime. It's a bit like living in a society where everyone carries a metaphorical sledgehammer, ready to use it for even a minor infraction. So, as you drift further into sleep, let the chilling reality of the draconian legal code in ancient Greece settle over you. A system of laws that, for all its attempts at order, promised swift, agonizing, and disproportionate punishments for even minor transgressions. You feel the ghostly chill of the death penalty for petty theft, the fear of losing your freedom for a simple debt, and the profound discomfort of a society where justice could be horrifyingly absolute. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the pursuit of order could be so brutal and unforgiving. You're still there, lingering in that slightly unsettling echo of the draconian legal code, perhaps feeling a phantom shiver from the thought of disproportionate punishments. We've explored the demanding civic duties, the tyranny of the majority, the horrifying exclusions, the chilling power of ostracism, the risks of amateur leadership, the pervasive nature of legal battles, and the brutal consequences of democratic warfare and unforgiving laws. Now, let's confront one of the most terrifying failures of Athenian democracy, a phenomenon that could turn the very idea of rule by the people into a horrifying descent into chaos and violence. Mob rule's brutal grip. You witness democracy devolve into terrifying, violent chaos. Imagine yourself in the agora, the bustling heart of Athens, a place usually vibrant with debate and commerce. You're accustomed to the loud, passionate discussions of the assembly. But sometimes, something shifts. The reasoned arguments give way to shouts. The debates devolve into insults. And the collective will of the people transforms into a terrifying, uncontrollable mob. This wasn't always the case, of course, but the direct nature of Athenian democracy, without strong checks on popular emotion, made it uniquely vulnerable to this horrifying phenomenon. Consider the atmosphere during a time of intense crisis or public outrage. Perhaps news has just arrived of a military defeat, or a suspected treason, or a perceived injustice. You feel the collective anger building, a palpable wave of fury sweeping through the crowds. Orators, often demagogues, would skillfully tap into this raw emotion, inflaming passions, inciting the crowd to action without recourse to reason or established legal process. Imagine the terrifying power of thousands of angry citizens, unified in their rage, demanding immediate retribution. Their voices become a single, deafening roar, drowning out any dissenting opinions, any calls for calm or due process. This is where democracy could truly become terrifying. Without a professional police force to control large crowds, and with the assembly itself being the highest authority, there was little to stop a mob once it reached a fever pitch. You might witness spontaneous acts of violence, individuals suspected of wrongdoing being attacked, property being vandalized, or unpopular figures being physically threatened. It's a chilling reminder that the will of the people can, in its extreme, become indistinguishable from the brutal chaos of a riot. Historians still debate the frequency and severity of outright mob violence in Athenian democracy, acknowledging that while formal legal processes usually prevailed, the potential for popular rage to directly influence or even bypass those processes was a constant threat, sometimes leading to injustices. The most famous example, which we briefly touched upon, is the trial of the generals after the Battle of Arginusae, 406 BCE. The Athenian navy won a major victory, but a storm prevented them from rescuing survivors from wrecked ships. Public outrage, fueled by the families of the drowned, reached a fever pitch. The assembly, overriding established legal procedures that required individual trials, was pressured into holding a single, collective vote on the fate of all 8 generals. Imagine being on that jury, knowing that voting against the popular will could put your own life at risk. Despite some brave voices, including Socrates, who served on the jury and refused to participate in what he considered an illegal vote. The mob's fury prevailed. 6 generals were condemned to death and executed. You witness this horrifying miscarriage of justice, a direct consequence of unchecked popular rage overriding reason and law. A little-known detail is that the Prytany, the executive committee, initially tried to resist the illegal vote, but ultimately succumbed to the pressure of the enraged assembly, showing how even the state's organs could be intimidated by the mob. This reliance on direct democracy, while empowering citizens, also meant that the city was perpetually vulnerable to sudden swings of public opinion, to the charismatic manipulation of demagogues, and to the raw, untamed emotions of a large crowd. There were no strong constitutional safeguards to protect individuals from the collective fury. Your reputation, your property, your very life could be swept away in an instant by a wave of popular condemnation, fueled by rumor and raw emotion. It's a terrifying thought that the very system designed to give you power could, in its darkest moments, become your greatest oppressor. So, as you drift further into sleep, let the chilling reality of mob rule's brutal grip in ancient Greek democracy settle over you. The noble ideals of self-governance sometimes devolved into terrifying displays of unchecked popular rage, where justice was trampled and individuals became victims of collective hysteria. You feel the ghostly roar of the angry crowd, the palpable fear of being caught in its relentless tide, and the profound discomfort of a freedom that could, at any moment, transform into terrifying chaos. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the very voice of the people could become so horrifyingly destructive. You're still there, lingering in that slightly unsettling echo of mob rule's brutal grip, perhaps feeling a phantom roar from an ancient Athenian crowd. We've explored the demanding civic duties, the tyranny of the majority, the horrifying exclusions, the chilling power of ostracism, the risks of amateur leadership, the pervasive nature of legal battles, the brutal consequences of democratic warfare, and the unforgiving nature of their legal code. Now, as our journey through the awful aspects of ancient Greek democracy concludes, let's contemplate its ultimate, paradoxical reality. A fragile, fickle freedom? You contemplate a liberty constantly on the brink. Imagine yourself as an Athenian citizen, living your daily life, keenly aware of your unique position in the world. You possess liberties that most people in other ancient societies could only dream of: the right to speak your mind in the assembly, to vote on laws, to serve on juries, to directly shape the destiny of your city. This was, in many ways, an unprecedented experiment in self-governance, a beacon of light in a world dominated by kings, emperors, and oligarchs. But now, after our journey together, you understand that this freedom was not absolute, not stable, and often terrifyingly precarious. You realize that this freedom was built on horrifying exclusions. Remember the women, the medics, the slaves, their very existence, their complete lack of political rights, was the silent, brutal foundation upon which the male citizen's liberty was built. The leisure time, the resources, the very ability to participate in such an intense democracy, often came at the direct expense of countless others who suffered in silence. The freedom you enjoyed was, in essence, a luxury purchased through the systematic disenfranchisement and exploitation of a vast majority. This realization adds a chilling layer to the celebrated Athenian democracy. Historians still fiercely debate the moral and practical contradictions inherent in a democratic system that relied so heavily on chattel slavery and excluded vast segments of its population. Some argue that ancient democracies cannot be judged by modern standards, while others contend that the inherent hypocrisy was a fundamental weakness. Then there's the constant instability. Your freedom came with the terrifying risk of the tyranny of the majority, where popular anger or irrational impulses could lead to unjust laws or the arbitrary condemnation of individuals. You lived with the knowledge that your own status, your property, or even your life could be shattered by a single vote, driven by fleeting emotions or the machinations of rivals. This isn't the stable, predictable freedom of a modern constitutional republic. It's a freedom that demands constant vigilance and leaves you vulnerable to the whims of the crowd. A little-known detail is that Athenian democracy was periodically overthrown by oligarchic coups, sometimes with Spartan support, demonstrating its inherent fragility and the constant struggle to maintain its form of government. The continuous cycle of warfare, often democratically decided, meant that your freedom was constantly at risk. You voted for wars that might decimate your family, bankrupt your city, or lead to brutal defeats. The ideal of the citizen soldier, while noble, also meant that the price of democratic decision-making was paid directly in blood. You might have the freedom to choose war, but you also had the horrifying obligation to fight in it, with all its inherent dangers. It's like having a remote control to a battlefield where your own life is one of the pawns. The amateur nature of their leadership added another layer of precariousness. While it fostered participation, it also meant that vital state functions were often handled by inexperienced citizens. This could lead to inefficiencies, strategic blunders, and a general lack of consistent governance, making your freedom feel more like a chaotic experiment than a stable system. You might complain about your random lottery-chosen leader, but you were stuck with him for the year. Finally, the draconian undertones of their legal code and the ever-present threat of lawsuits meant that justice, while accessible, could be horrifyingly severe and personally draining. Your legal freedom was often accompanied by the risk of agonizing punishments or endless, vindictive legal battles. You were free to sue, but also free to be ruined by a lawsuit. As you close your eyes, the image of ancient Athenian democracy, both brilliant and terrifying, begins to soften. It was a revolutionary experiment, a profound leap forward in human governance. But it was also a system fraught with inherent contradictions, brutal exclusions, and a fundamental instability that made life for many of its inhabitants, even its privileged citizens, surprisingly precarious and often horrifying. You realize that this celebrated freedom was not a gentle embrace, but a relentless, demanding, and often brutal dance on the edge of chaos.